Welcome back to Behind the Brim, where we go inside the mind of scratch golfers, club champions, and industry experts. Our goal is to uncover insights that'll help you lower your handicap and enjoy the game of golf even more. I'm your host, Cameron Lindsay, and I want to personally thank you for joining us for today's show. If you have any questions about anything you hear or just want to get in touch with us, please reach out at our Instagram, behindthebrim_golf, and we'd be happy to chat. Without any further ado, let's get to today's guest. Today, we're thrilled to be joined by the sweet swinging Russell Bowie. He's a member and 8-time club champion at Brampton Golf Club, where he also holds the competitive course record with an unbelievable 8 under 63. Russell's playing resume is deep. He's a past winner of the Ontario Champion of Champions, a silver medalist at the 2021 Deaflympics, and the owner of countless top finishes on the Ontario and Canadian golf circuit. He's been competing at this high level for well over a decade. In 2012, he recorded a top 5 at the Ontario Amateur. 2016 saw top 3 at the Toronto Star. And last year, he tied for 3rd at the Ontario Men's Mid-Am and finished 2nd at the World Deaf Golf Championship. I had the pleasure of playing alongside Russ at Queen's University, where he also captained our team as the most valuable player. And believe me, he was. Currently plays off a +3 handicap while handling the position of senior consultant for Brightly. It's a treat to have him with us today. Russ, thanks for joining us, brother.
Yeah, no, it's no problem. Thanks for having me, and thanks for the kind introduction. I kind of mentioned to you before, but if you play long enough, you kind of manage to dredge up enough results to sounds good when you put it all together in one paragraph. So looking forward to it.
Yeah, appreciate you being here. And putting together this intro was tough because I had to leave out some really high finishes. It's not a problem we have for myself or my co-host Chandler. So that was you made it hard on us there. But I appreciate you being here, man, and looking forward to getting it into it with you today. And like we do with all our guests, maybe we can just provide a little context to our listeners. How did you get introduced to the game of golf? We always like to start there.
Yeah, sure. I think it's just kind of through my family. Like my family had enough golfers in it, like kind of nothing serious, but people, we had a few people with, private memberships, and like at family gatherings, it wasn't uncommon to have, just golf on TV in the background. So it was kind of something that other family members had done. And so it's just kind of, I had that familiarity with it. And then it was mostly through my grandfather, who was a member at Brampton Golf Club, which is where I'm now a member. So I kind of got started there through him as a really young kid. Like when you're really young, it was pretty cheap. So it's just kind of something I did. I would tag along once in a while, go to the range, and just kind of got a pretty early start on it, and kind of had somewhat of a natural affinity for it. So it's just kind of with that early start, it just kind of never left, and always was kind of part of my life from a pretty early age. And I played other sports more seriously growing up, and kind of halfway through high school, just kind of burnt out from the other sports, and just, I found it, I enjoyed golf at a, deeper level, like kind of deep inside. If I had a free day, like I wanted to go to the golf course and hit golf balls or whatever. And so I decided to kind of go full in on golf. And kind of since then, it's been kind of the biggest thing I've done outside of school or work. It's kind of been a fixture in my life. And I hope to kind of keep that as long as I can. And life obviously gets in the way, but that's kind of my goal kind of going forward, is just kind of to keep it as a big part of my life as it is and has been kind of growing up.
I think you made the right choice on choosing golf, because just for our listeners, I refer to Russ affectionately as the Adam Scott of Ontario golf. If you see his golf swing, it just looks like it was just meant to be. So I don't know what those other sports were, but good choice on sticking with golf, buddy.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely a better sport as you get older. It's definitely a sport that it's easier to stick with and it's easier on the body. And it's, it's professionally, it's something that it's easy to do with coworkers or others. Like it's kind of, I wasn't thinking about that at the time, but I set myself up for success long-term, I think.
I was talking to a buddy the other day, and I just said, all roads lead to golf, baby. Because all these guys played baseball or hockey or soccer, and as we're getting older and the bodies are wearing down a little bit, everybody's just coming over to golf, and I love it. It's like,
Yeah.
well, join the club.
Every year the group gets a little bit bigger. So yeah, exactly what I was thinking.
And we had a lifetime head start. It's perfect. So, Russ, as you know, during this podcast, we really want to kick it off with our report card section. It's the fixture in behind the brim. And essentially, we just want you to grade your game A through F in the 4 primary areas of driving, irons, short game, and putting. And then based on the grading, we're going to unpack your top 2 strengths. So just want to throw it over to you. What would you say? Take us through the grading really within those 4 areas.
Yeah, it's tough to grade yourself like this, I think, because you have good days and you have bad days, and day to day the grade can change. So but like big picture, I would like my strength would be my irons, like my iron game. I will rate that the highest at a B. I'm not gonna give myself an A in anything because I think that I would consider exceeds expectations, which I don't know if you can ever want to feel that way. I would give myself a B plus in iron play. It's I think the most reliable and kind of year to year, day to day, year to year is kind of the best part of my game. My kind of I think out of that, my driving, it's another full swing thing. It'll probably be number 2 on the list. I'll rate that like a B minus. I'm just keep in mind, like I will not give myself an A, so that's the B plus is I'm considering it a high mark for the irons, and then B minus for driving, just because I think it's a little less consistent in my iron play. I still struggle with the miss with the driver, like the costly miss with the driver that can really derail around. So I'm giving that a B minus, and then putting, I'm going to give a C. I don't consider myself to be a bad putter. I'm just not a great putter. I feel like I could make a lot more putts than I do. Like when you're a good iron player, typically you have maybe more birdie chances than bad iron players, and I don't think I capitalize as much as I potentially could. But I don't. Yeah. So I think I said C for putting. Then my short game, I'm going to rank last. I'll give that a C minus. Again, I don't. Mostly, there's a few areas in my short game that my bunker play is the worst part of my game. Like I'm okay on a straightforward chips and whatnot, but when things get a little hairy, like the lies get a little weedy, like I can struggle on those, and bunker plays, it's definitely the worst part of my game. So yeah, so short game C minus, last on the list. Definitely room for improvement in that one.
Well, I just got to say, I'm really happy you weren't my teacher at school, because I would have had to come home with my report card with my tail between my legs for my parents if you're getting a B plus on iron play. But
Yeah.
but I also think that speaks to the improvement mindset for you and not resting on your laurels and still feeling like you have room to improve. So I think that's interesting because you're the first guest to give their highest grade that low, and knowing how good you are, I think it speaks to maybe where your mindset is and where you think you can go. So that's kind of neat too.
Yeah, I'm not surprised I can be harsh on my evaluations, but yeah, I just think golf is like you're so like even as a better player, you're still so bad sometimes. Like in that, unless you get to the point where that doesn't happen, like I think there's just always so much room for improvement in the game, even your strengths and especially your weaknesses.
Love it. Well, let's get into it then, Russ. Let's start with the irons, strength of your game. I watched you hit some towering long irons at Queens. You just swing it so smooth. Kick us off with some of your keys to successful iron play. What are some of those keys that you look for you?
Yeah, I think the big thing is the strike, both in terms of like the squareness or hitting with the square face, but also like there's kind of a right, like everybody kind of knows like irons should hit down on it. There should be the descending blow, ball first, then ground. But even within that, you don't want to get too extreme. Like you don't want to be too steep, or like So I always really like paying attention to the divots. Like there's a right kind of look to a divot and a feel to it where it's just shallow but square. And um, with irons, like that's the key, is like a descending blow, but like not too much of one. And that just really helps. It gives control on the ball flight and just kind of gives more distance. If you don't have that descending blow, like too shallow, you kind of, there's probably a little too much loft and impact. So it's just kind of the big thing with irons, just getting that strike right. So obviously that's easier said than done, but that's something I'm always paying attention to. Like even you can be hitting your irons and it can feel super flush, but if it's too steep, then I don't consider that to be a good thing. Like there's kind of a right spot you want to be. And then yeah, so like that, I think the strike is just the main thing, like center contact, square face with like just kind of the right, kind of putting the right hit on the ball. And that's usually what gives it that sound. Like when you hear somebody who's good at hitting a golf ball, like that's kind of what gives it that sound. It just sounds a little bit different. It's just hitting it kind of correctly, like the moment of impact. So obviously you can expand on that. Like that, I've shrunk the swing down to about a 1 foot area, like before and after the golf ball. But like, I think that's what you want to pay attention to. Like if that's right, then it doesn't really matter what happens before or after that. Like if that impact zone is correct, then who cares? But if it's not, then yeah, you want to look at the swing and why it's not happening. And for everybody, it's going to be something different. But I think that's what you really need to pay attention to, is like that strike, and then kind of related to that, the flight and what's happening with the ball.
I love it. So you use the divot as like a primary form of feedback for you. And then will you also look at the strike mark on the face to see, did I catch that center, heel, toe, that as well?
Yeah, for sure. And you usually know where you hit on the face, but yeah, like you can mock up a ball, mock up the face with something that just confirm that what you think, like what you're feeling is lining up with what actually happened. And yeah, like I wouldn't say I use the divot too much. Like obviously divots can be misleading. Like it's definitely not something you want to use as the rule of law. Like, if the ground is not flat, if some turf types are different, like the way that, like, so you can kind of get thrown off too, but it's a good starting point. And now with like TrackMan and some of the launch monitor technology, you can look at your strike and impact numbers wise, but a lot of it's feel, a lot of it, you can kind of just tell when something's right. Like kind of taking all those things together and just trying to put everything together like a puzzle. Like what's everything telling you about what's happening?
So you just after you strike the ball, there's just a general assessment of, did I catch that solid? Like, was that the right solid feel? Was it ball first? Was it the right kind of angle of attack? Did it come off the center of the face? And that's gonna provide the feedback for you as to like, was that a solid execution or not?
Yeah. So I think that tells you a lot about, like, even ignoring what happened to the ball. If it curved too much right or left, like that's kind of a face control issue. But I like, generally, if the strike is really nice, then you're not far off. Like then you can kind of work on the face control as a separate issue. But just maintaining a really clean, good strike in the ball with your irons just kind of goes a long way. It's kind of I like that being good first before I worry about a lot of other stuff.
Interesting. So if we were to work backwards, let's talk about some stuff that maybe leads to the good strike. So if we're talking to you about some of your keys to executing a good strike with your iron, could be tempo, whatever it may be for you, what are some, I guess, you could call it fundamentals, or what are just some keys that allow you to put a good strike on the ball beyond having just played for a long time and having a good swing?
Yeah, it's it's obviously different for everybody. Like having your hands forward at impact, like having a club come down from a good spot. So for me, like there's definitely a rhythm aspect to it. Like when you're swinging well, like there's kind of a rhythm and a flow to the golf swing. that happens like start to finish, not just from the top down, like from the address up to top, down, back down on the ball. I find that helps, like just kind of when things go bad, a lot of times the rhythm gets off a little bit because then you're trying to, a lot of times that's just in response to things going bad. Then you'll change the rhythm, starts to get it more aggressive or just different. So just trying to be aware of your rhythm, even just being aware of it can be tricky. So you kind of just completely lose sight of what you're doing sometimes. So just trying to have that awareness of like the overall rhythm of the swing helps. And yeah, the hand, I mean, I mentioned hands forward. That's a tricky thing. That's not really a conscious thing for me. Like that's one of those things I think happens as a result of everything else, like your body moving well. But I think that's also in response to having good rhythm, like having a good kind of just using a body well, like kind of the force generally being increased, like as you get into like kind of, well, like it's all maximized at the ball as opposed to somewhere else in your swing.
Gotcha.
So that was all, I don't know, that was a bit hazy, a bit voodoo-ish, but like it's kind of, without getting into like mechanics, which again are individual, like that's kind of, I think, is a good starting point for everyone, like just kind of the flow of a swing. Like picture some of the best swingers of all time, right? There's always been like a rhythm and a flow to their golf swing. Not all of them, but I think most of them. Think about Rory McIlroy with the driver, Tiger with an iron, some of the older guys, especially the older guys when technology was not as helpful. Like they had to, the reason a rhythm is so good is that's how they maximize kind of the efficiency of the swing, and kind of the force through the ball was just kind of, was that kind of gradual increase of speed, kind of right to the moment of impact.
Yeah, the right sequencing, like you said, of the body, the arms, and the club, making sure the lower body starts, then it leads into the midsection, then into the arms, and then in the club, the right sequence of delivery, kind of in rhythm, like you just said. Something I wanna sit on there, Russ, because like you mentioned, every swing's different. Everybody's gonna work on different things in their golf swing, but a reliable, consistent strike on the ball that's constant. If you want to hit the ball well, that 1 foot around impact needs to be, it's constant for all good players. What could the average player do? What could the club player do that's listening to this to work on that? And I mean, just things I've seen when I was younger, working on, I guess, strike point, trying to figure out how to bottom out at the right point. I had a coach tell me to throw a chalk line down on the mat or on the grass on the driving range, and basically I'd put the balls on that chalk line, and they wanted me to make sure that my divot was on that line or ahead of that line. So they gave me that visual cue of, we'd never want to see a divot behind the ball, because then obviously it's chunked. Like you just said, you never want to see that. You want ball first. And from what I see with some of the club players, consistent contact is a big problem. Sometimes it's thin, sometimes it's fat, but I never see anybody doing the drill of, hey, let's just throw a little chalk line down and hit balls and get that visual feedback and sort of like kinesthetic feedback of, okay, let me get some feedback on where that strike was, and get the image of almost the divot after the ball. Do you think there'd be some value there, or do you have any other pointers for somebody who's listening?
Yeah, absolutely. If somebody like having a visual cue like that would absolutely can help. Even like you can put up visual cues down to like kind of toe heel, like even putting a couple tees, like kind of creating a gate for yourself where the club should go through. Or if you're somebody who really tends to hit it off the heel or the toe, like you just put some sort of soft barrier down on the one side to just visually force yourself to kind of like, okay, the club cannot go over there. Yeah, like that can definitely help. I think long term, it's not really that realistic. Like when you're going to put a chalk line down every swing, or like kind of, it only lasts so long. That's what sometimes mats can be good for, like a mat with a line on it. Like the line doesn't change, so you can kind of just use it. I like hitting a lot of soft wedges. So it's kind of, it's not a full iron, but like I like hitting a lot of, like when I go to a driving range and I have a basket of balls, I'll hit like 30% of them would be soft wedges. Like kind of, I find it really helps really helps you to feel for where the ground, like where you're bottoming out, where the ground is, kind of. And when I say soft wedge, it's a little bit slower. You get a better feel for your sequencing, and then like for me when I'm struggling, when you're on a range and the session is just going poorly, like I'm like, all right, let's pull out the wedge, like let's just do some soft wedges again and kind of reset. Because I just find it really helps. You really reinforces the bottom of your arc, like kind of how you're getting through the ball, and then also the sequencing. Like when you slow it down a little bit, the sequencing, you become more aware of it, and tends to help as well.
Hmm.
So it kind of relates to, I say low point as in like when you're really nipping soft wedge as well, like that's usually a really good sign. Like that means you're in real control of your swing and exactly how you're delivering the club. Whereas if you're not, then that's usually that's a good indication something's wrong. And sometimes with a bigger, longer, faster swing, you can maybe compensate, but it's harder to compensate for kind of a slower wedge swing, which is a little bit, the leading edge is a little bit more in play with a shot like that.
Interesting. So when you say a soft wedge, what wedge are you hitting and how far are you trying to hit this wedge just generally?
I use my lob wedge, but it can be a lob wedge, a sand wedge, like not a pitching wedge. I would say something beyond a pitching wedge, like more of a, one of your whatever. I would say your highest lofted wedge, honestly. Not far. Like I mean, it can start with little half swings, but it can even be like so a half swing that goes 30, 40, like to the end of the tee deck, 30, 40 yards, but then or 50 yards, like but then even like a full swing at a slower speed where it's only going 70% of your full distance, but like kind of you're still taking it through the full kind of your full swing in terms of length of swing, but it's just at a lot slower pace. And that just I always find for me personally that kind of helps reset things and like if range session's going bad, just do that, and then it kind of can help kind of just reset things, and it can get back into whatever club you're working on. And I find it almost always helps. It just you can't really fake a soft wedge swing in my opinion. Like it kind of things kind of have to happen in the right order in order for that swing to work.
That's interesting you say that. When I warm up next to my dad on the range, he's one of the better strikers that I play with on a regular basis, and he spends, like you said, maybe a third of his time hitting 50-yard wedges to these baskets we have on the range. And he talks about just getting a feel for the tempo. You've mentioned sequence, strike point. I think he does the same thing. It just calibrates his movement for him. And then when he grabs the longer stuff, it's just an extension of what he was just doing. And conversely, you see most of the players on the range, they want to go to the long stuff as fast as possible. Like they want to take the head cover off before they've even hit a dozen golf balls.
Yeah, no, for sure. And like I think the other thing is, especially if you don't play a lot, it can just help get the feel of the club in your hand again, the feel of the club head kind of just because I know when I don't play for a while and then come back to it, like it just feels so foreign. And like if I go into a long light club and then like I just never really get that feel of the club head. But when a wedge typically is one of the heavier kind of feeling clubs in your hand, it just helps really just get you in tune with the club and the kind of feel of it moving around you. I mean, I like watch Tiger on the range. Like Tiger can hit these little half wedges that are just nipped, right? Like just brushing the turf, and like that is so hard to do. Like you get to the point where you do that, like things are in a really good spot. So yeah, I mean, and your dad's a great player, so that completely makes sense to me. Like he's a sweet swinger himself.
I'll tell him you told him that. Yeah, I think that's a great takeaway for me, for our listeners. Just spend more time with those high lofted wedges, get some tempo. And it sounds like too you're very mindful of what you're doing when you're making those swings, whether it's the tempo or whether it's your contact. It sounds like you're not just raking these shots. It just sounds like there's some mindfulness or some attention to what's actually happening with the swing. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the first few of any bucket will be, you're just trying to maybe loosen the cobwebs up a bit, but
Yeah.
yeah, like you want to kind of, for me, it's a big thing. It's just the way the club is interacting with the ground, and like I just I want to try to make sure that that's just in a really neutral, tidy, like kind of just going through the ball really well. And then, yeah, like with the short wedges, it's a good starting point. Or like I said, it's a good point to go back to. Like it just kind of, there's like when you just slow it down, you can really be mindful of how it's moving and just aware of what the golf club is doing and how you're controlling it. Just because when you go a little bit slower like that, it's things you can maybe get away with a longer club. You can't, it just doesn't really work. So yeah, like it for sure. Like the mindfulness, you want to try to be mindful of what's going on and correct for it if you can.
I love that. And I feel like too, the 50-yard shot, the 60-yard shot on the golf course, that's the heebie-jeebie zone for a lot of people, the do not fly zone. So I think that's good practice anyway, just to get comfortable even hitting a few of those shots, period. Just having that shot, a little bit of a comfort factor there.
Absolutely. And like, but like, why are people uncomfortable? Like, why is that such a hard shot for people? And I think it's because people's sequencing is not like everything's kind of out of order. So like when you take a shorter swing, you're basically cutting off a quarter of the order. So like now you can't really compensate in ways you might otherwise be able to with the full swing. And I think that's a big part of it, right? Like I think that's kind of, and that's why I like doing those swings. I think it's telling of what's maybe going on under the hood that maybe can get hidden sometimes. But yeah, for sure. And like, yeah, it'll help your game too. Like those shots come up on a golf course, so it's good to be comfortable with them.
And is there any cues that you can provide our listener for hitting those shots? Do you have a narrow stance? Is the ball in the middle? Just a framework for how you approach those shots.
Yeah, I think ball is more or less middle of the stance. Your feet are going to be closer together than a forehand. Like it's going to be a little bit more of a, like it's a softer stance is what I'm going to say. So everything's just a little bit brought in a little bit. So ball's a little further back, like feet a little close together. Your posture might be a little bit softer, a little less rigid, like a little less, because you're not trying to hit it far, right? You're trying to hit it controlled and well. And I think there's just try to remember to have good rhythm, like feel the club going back and kind of, I've noticed for myself and other people, like if you tell somebody to take a half swing, they usually take like a 3/4 swing. Like people, it's really hard to be aware of like what your swing, like where your swing actually is. Like and I do it myself. Like sometimes I'm like, I just want to do a little 50% here, but then like I see it to the club, like my arms are like back at shoulder height, like I'm like way further back than 50%. And that's what I kind of mean. Like it's really easy to lose awareness and lose sight of what, like how you're actually moving the golf club. So yeah, I like to just try to just really be aware of what's going on, and then the stance, everything's just a little bit. It's like it's kind of the same way you move through your bag. The shorter the club gets, you get a little closer to the ball. Ball moves a little bit back in your stance, and things like that. Your hands maybe. Everything just kind of comes back a bit to a softer setup.
And one more question on the half wedges, the 3/4 wedges. In terms of weight transfer, where do you fall with hitting those shots? By that I mean with the driver, there might obviously be some more loading, some more transfer of weight. How does the weight distribution work for you when you're making, let's say, like a 60-yard shot that you're hitting?
Yeah, I mean it's obviously a lot. It's a lot more discreet than a driver or something, but that's one thing I've also found is it's also maybe a little bit easier to feel, like when you're just kind of doing a little bit of softer, slower swing, like you can feel it a little bit more. Like there's weight transfer. It's like going back on the backswing, like you're moving into your back foot a little bit more, like kind of back towards your right heel, like the weight's kind of, that's the direction it's moving, and then going through, like it's just going back to the front foot. And with those short swings, you want to try to finish on the front foot and like good balance and everything. And that'll carry through into the longer clubs. If you can do it on the shorter clubs when their feet are a little close together, like when you're, you know, it's a good indication that you're probably on the right track. But it's not moving much. Like on a short wedge shot, like you're not, it's pretty centered, but there is some for sure.
Okay. So just a subtle weight transfer, but similar principles, finish on your front foot, in balance, looking out in the target in front of you. Are you picking targets when you're doing this? Are you picking like a spot you want to hit this to, or is this purely about the strike and just the feel of just balance for you?
It depends. Like if I'm doing, sometimes there's definitely like, I want to hit it this, like I'm looking at something that just like, there's a dark spot in the grass or the end of the tee deck or whatever. Like sometimes I'm really trying to hit like that specific yardage. But like I said, like if I'm having a bad range session and like I'm just doing this thing where I go grab my wedge in the middle and slow things down, like I don't necessarily have a target I'm trying to hit or a distance. It's just more I'm just trying to be aware of the swing and what's going on. I'm not really worried about this one going 5 yards further than the last one I just hit. It's more just trying to like, am I hitting it? Is everything just kind of feeling right? So when I reset, I don't pay attention to it, but like, yeah, like otherwise it's good to sometimes have a very specific target. Then you can, because like you said, like it's a 50-yard shot on the golf course, right? Like you want to know what does it take for me to hit it 50 yards and it's this far, this hard of a swing or whatever. So it's a bit of both, but depending on kind of what my goal is for that time.
Love it. I'm actually excited to try this out myself. I think this is an area I've overlooked. I'm just eager to get to hitting full shots, and I think I maybe hadn't seen the amount of value in doing an exercise like this and practice like this, and then you get out on the golf course and your tempo gets off, or you have that 50-yard shot, or I think to your point around length of swing, sometimes I just feel like I'm blindfolded. I don't quite even know where the swing goes. I don't have that awareness of even where it is.
Yeah.
So I'm excited personally.
Yeah, it's not something I've done my whole life. It's something that I have found really helps. So I'm doing it more and more, I find, as the years go by.
And to your point, I could think of all the YouTube range sessions with Tiger. He always starts with those quiet wedges. Like it doesn't even look like he's hitting to a point. He just starts with those quiet, nippy wedges. And I think about JT too, like the best wedge player on tour. He just hits those quiet, like just calm 60-yard wedges, 70-yard wedges, and they just look so clean. So I think it's not a surprise that they're doing that, but here, a lot of us are overlooking it. So that's a great call out. So I want to ask you in terms of targeting. So you're out on the golf course, you've got a 7-iron in your hand. How are you targeting? Just take me through that.
Like in terms of where I'm aiming, or in terms of like how I physically set myself up to aim, or both?
Yeah, take us through both. More around how you align yourself to the target that you've chosen,
Okay.
But also take us through how you select targets.
Okay, yeah. I mean, so say we're in the middle of the fairway, 7-iron distance. First things first is where's the pin? Like, where do you want to aim this? Like, where's the trouble? So usually you should not be aiming at the pin. Like, say the pin's tucked somewhere, like you're aiming left or right of it, wherever it's tucked. Give yourself a little bit of a buffer. And then if you're not hitting it well that day, even more of a buffer, like depending on especially what your miss is. But very rarely are you aiming, especially with a 7-iron, you're not aiming at the pin, I would say. Like you should always just give yourself a little bit of a buffer. So you decide where you want to hit it at the green. And then for me, I had a lesson when I was a young kid. And this is how I aim in the club. You have your ball. I try to find something in front of the ball, like within 2 yards, like within almost the closer the better. Like, a twig or a piece of like a discolored piece of grass or something between your ball and where you want to aim that's on that line. Because it's a lot easier to aim at something that's a foot away than something that's 180 yards away. So, and then since it's on a line, it's a straight line, right? So it's just you have 2 points, you now have a straight line. So you have When I go behind the ball, what I do is I put the club face behind the ball, lined up with that whatever that intermediate target was, a few feet ahead. But I also match my right foot up with the club face. So I kind of go, maybe hard to visualize, but I put the club face and the right foot down kind of together and like in the same orientation. Make sure that's lined up with the spot, which also tells you it's lined up with where you're aiming. And then once that right foot is good, then I just take my left foot up against the right foot and I just kind of spread them apart on a straight line. And that's kind of what I've always done. I found it's helpful. Like, I definitely get sloppy with it sometimes. Like sometimes I do it quickly and, but then eventually your alignment gets off and you have to start paying attention a bit more to what you're doing. But I just found that's the only real way to kind of swing in, swing out, be aimed correctly. And it's actually hard to do. It's hard to aim yourself correctly. But that's kind of my technique, and then kind of pull the trigger from there.
So I'm picking up the visual of parallel lines. So you've got your target line, and then you've got your feet line, and they're creating those train tracks, those parallel lines, and creates kind of that neutral setup, it sounds like.
Yeah, so your club face is on the right rail. For me as a righty, it's on the right rail. Your feet are on the left rail, and they're both kind of on the same cross tie. Like so, then yeah, you're just everything's straight and square, and you're ready to go. It's also good to test yourself once in a while. You'd be surprised. Like even doing that, sometimes I get off track, and your eyes become used to seeing what it thinks is a straight line. Like when you look up, like sometimes when you look up, and you're like, I'm not aiming right. And you kind of adjust, but a lot of times your eyes are lying to you. So it's important to test yourself once in a while to make sure you can line up correctly. Because like if you're not lined up correctly, then like, so it's like your brain's going to know that and it's going to compensate without you even knowing.
Yeah, I think it's not surprising to me to hear you say that that's the way that you set it in the ball consistently. If you read articles with Tiger, Rory, Jack Nicklaus, they all use that intermediate point as their spot that they set in, and they use that, and then they set parallel to that line. So I would just encourage anyone who's listening that's struggling with setting up to the ball correctly, try to leverage that intermediate point. I know I started using it a handful of years ago, and I found it super helpful. Had been overlooking it for a long time. So take a page out of Russ's book and give that a try. I think that'd be super helpful.
Yeah, it's obviously a page that took out of everyone else's book as well. But I think it's probably one of the few not foolproof, but more reliable ways to line yourself up.
I love it. And one last, actually, you know what? I do want to quickly ask you in terms of a mistake that you see club golfers make. What's a common mistake with irons that you see players that just club players make?
Well, I mean, there's a spectrum of club players. Like I can think about some people, and then I think about some other people, and they're very different golfers.
Give us a recurring mistake that you see with irons, just generally.
I think a lot of people overswing their irons. Like an iron swing does not need to be a long, complicated motion. Like it can be very simple, almost the simpler the better. And it kind of ties into what I said about the strike earlier. Like if you work on getting your strike right, like the swing itself does not need to be long or visually even that fast or aggressive. Like it's kind of, if you're hitting it correctly with an iron, like it's kind of going to take care of itself. Like even think about tour players, a lot of them don't look like they're hitting it that hard, but like they're obviously hitting it a very long way, especially with their irons. Like the distance on an iron comes from the strike and hitting it correctly as opposed to the raw speed, like less so than it would. Like obviously speed matters, but yeah, I think maybe just the aggressiveness of the swing. Like an iron, it's a control golf shot. Like that's what an iron should be. Like you're trying to hit it the exact same number every single time with that iron, and that's just kind of how it should be swung.
So more swing within yourself, more about repeatability. You want to fly this club 170 every time. It's not about how far can I hit this 7-iron. It's about how consistently can I hit my number.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
I think that's a good place to move on from the irons. 3 really good cues, line up with an intermediate target, practice those those shorter to middle distance wedges, and swing within yourself with the irons. I think those are three amazing cues. So
Oh,
oh, sorry, Russ.
no, I was just going to say I write them down for myself, so I'll remember them too.
Yeah, I mean, I'm itching to get on the driving range and put those into play. I think sometimes it's easy to fall into the trap of ego. I'm just thinking about for myself personally. Your playing partner grabs a 7-iron, you want to hit an 8-iron, or you thought maybe it should have been a 6 for you, but you now want to hit the 7 because that's what they hit. And it's like let's go back to tempo. Let's go back to balance. What am I going to hit that number?
Yeah.
That's just a great call out. Just everything you've said there is just a fantastic call out. Let's jump into driving, Russ. Similar format. Give me some successful keys to driving for you.
Yeah, I mean, it's a driver is also a swing. It's a swing, so a lot of the iron stuff will be similar as well, like tempo, rhythm, even more so with the driver. I think with the drive, like the irons, the driver, the strike is important, but more in terms of hitting the center of the face. That's important for irons too, but I find with driver, like that is really, really important because not hitting the center of the face with driver, that tends to cause left and right dispersion to go way up. Then even, just the spin rate, like, everything, the driver is way more sensitive to mishits than anything else. So for me, I really like to try to just make sure I'm hitting the center of the face because that can make a big difference. And then compared to irons, like driver setup, I think I pay more attention to how I'm setting up to the ball with my driver than maybe I do with my irons. Irons feel like a more natural setup to me. With driver, I'm always working to try to make sure I'm set up to try to hit the driver as well as I can. So for me, a big thing is I naturally don't like to tilt too much. So like I'm always trying to just make sure I got a tilt to my setup position. Shift your forward hip forward a bit and just make sure like there is a tilt because you do want to hit up on it. I struggled for a long time hitting up on a driver, and that not necessarily a bad thing, but it's not necessarily the best way to hit a driver. So I'm just always trying to be aware of like am I set up to hit a driver or am I just hitting this like a 5-iron type thing? So I try to just from the get-go, try to set up myself into a little more of a different position compared to iron. Like irons, I don't think about it too much. Like I do a little bit, but with the driver for sure, it's like, all right, are we like in a good spot here to make a driver swing? Because it's the only club you're not hitting off the ground. So it's a little bit of a different setup to make that happen. And then like I tend to rush my driver. So like I try to make sure I'm aware of finishing the backswing, like just getting back there before you come racing down. It's hard to do. Like you always like it's you want to hit it, right? You're anxious and you just want to change direction. But I try to just give that like visually, there's no difference, but just mentally, just like give it that little split second. Like let's just get back, like get all the way back there, and then you can go. So those are kind of my main keys, like setup and then just finishing that backswing and having that rhythm kind of all the way to the top of the swing.
Gotcha. So making sure the inclination as a righty, right shoulder below left at address, right hip maybe a little below left hip, just creating that upward angle of attack, like presetting it almost. Yeah. And then just giving yourself a moment longer in the transition, it sounds like.
Yeah, exactly. So, and it's a constant battle for those two things for me. And like, just that's what I found. If I can do those two things, it tends to help. And then also just trying to hit the center of the face, like if you're not hitting the center of the face, you just got to fix that. Like you can't really hit a good golf shot without hitting the center of the face, especially with a driver.
When you're teeing up a driver, how high do you tee it up? And let's just talk relative to the crown of the driver, the top of the driver.
Yeah, I tee up a little bit lower than so about half a ball above the crown, which historically was normal, but I think in recent years, the norm has kind of gotten a little bit higher. Like you notice lot of tour players, a lot of players in general tee the ball up a little bit higher than maybe, before the clubs got as big as they are. But I still tend to tee it a little bit lower than some other people. Just because for me personally, my tendency is to catch it a little bit high in the face. So if I tee it up high, I tend to hit it, just start catching it too high in the face, and then you lose spin, you lose the flight, kind of just, it's not where I want it to be. So, yeah, so half the ball above the crown, and then even lower if I'm really not feeling great, like just for whatever reason, I tend to just, if I'm going to miss it on the face, it's going to be high, not low. So I try to just compensate for that with the tee height.
And are you trying to work the ball any specific direction? Do you have a preference on shape?
Not really. Like, I try to hit it straight. With the driver, I used to hit a big draw. Now I'm more of try to hit a little bit of a fade now, which is super common. I think just the club designs don't seem to lend themselves as well to hitting draws. Like when I was a kid, it was a big loopy draw, but now I find it hard to spin drivers like I used to. So like sometimes hitting draws, I just can't get, like, it just doesn't work as well. But generally, I'm trying to hit it pretty straight. I'm not trying to work it, like hole to hole. I'm not necessarily trying to work it at all. Like I'm just trying to go with the shape I had that day. And generally speaking, going towards more of trying to see it go right, kind of just hitting a fade. I find just gets a little more spin, a little bit of a softer flight that is a little bit nicer to work with.
Gotcha. So let's pretend you're missing the face that day, or for the last week, you haven't been getting that quite strike that you're looking for. How will you work on that? How will you improve the strike? Like if our listeners struggling to find the center of the face, where can they start?
Yeah, that's always tough. I'll go to the range. Say you can't go to the range, and I'll choke down a bit, shorten the club up a bit, slow it down a little bit. And I'll actually try to intentionally hit the opposite side of the face. Like try to just, like if you just find yourself hitting it off the toe every single time, like try to hit some heel balls. Like try to catch the heel, and then you might find that either makes you hit it in the center because you're compensating, or you can't hit the heel and then just try to reset your whole system, right? And then just kind of take it from there. So for me, it also still teeing up lower, or still teeing up a little bit lower. Is just, if I'm not hitting it well, I just find that tends to help. Just for whatever reason, I don't like. Sometimes trying to hit really up on it, and just trying to make a big driver swing can just cause problems, I find. So you don't want to do that permanently, but it can kind of, in the short term, as an emergency fix, I find it can kind of help. Like just get it down a bit lower and just not hit down on it, but not try to worry about launching it as much as you would if you're swinging it well. And then it
takes out a variable. It takes out a little bit of a variable when you take out trying to hit like the big high bomb a little bit.
If you're in the middle of a round and things are just haywire, like you just gotta fit. Like, I mean, it's not time for trying to be a hero, right? Like it's just tee it low and just keep it in play. So
I think too, similar to the iron takeaway, I know something I've messed around with in the past is impact tape. And our listeners, you can buy that on Amazon. You can pick it up on Amazon or most golf stores. And Russ, you being a +3 handicap, I think you have a very good awareness of the strike location on the face. So you, like you mentioned, if you're hitting it in the heel all day, you might just try to go out to the range and figure out, okay, let's work the toe a little bit. But for some of us, I even found myself, I was surprised I didn't have a great awareness necessarily of where exactly on the face it was striking, and just a session or two with the impact tape just to get a feel and testing myself. Where was that one? Oh, that one felt high toe, or that one felt low heel, to be able to calibrate the strike point and just have an awareness of, okay, where was that hit? Because I think a lot of us are operating sometimes a little bit in the dark. Like you said, it's the driver's so important to hit it out of the middle. But if you don't even know, okay, I tend to hit it off the bottom of the face, or I tend to hit off the top of the face, you can't make those adjustments. Like sounds like you're intuitively making as you go.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, like you need to know what's happening, like where you're hitting it. Even now, like drivers, you probably the extremes. You can feel extreme heel, extreme toe. You learn pretty quickly what that feels like. But even like marginally off can maybe you might not be aware of that. And yeah, impact tape. There's stuff you can spray in the face. Sometimes you can just clean the face off, and then the ball is going to leave a little mark on it, like when you hit with a fresh face. But yeah, it's super important to pay attention to.
Yeah, I think that's a good takeaway. I see more people obsessing over swing mechanics on the range. Where was my trail arm? Where was my right hip? All these different things, and they'll hit a shot, and it's almost like they're raking the next ball before they've even assessed, okay, where did I strike that, and where did the ball go? It's just more they're worried about the mechanics of the movement. And I think when I read Ben Hogan's book, he talked about using the feedback, using the ball and the strike, using that as feedback to guide, like using it as input to guide like future swings. And so I think sounds like that's a good call out that you're already doing that the listener would benefit from.
Yeah, I think so. Like, I mean, mechanics, you need to do mechanics. Like, that's what's helping you hit the ball. But like, if you're not hitting the center of the face, and like, there's going to be the ball is going to do stuff that you might think is due to mechanics, but that's just because like you hit it way off the toe, like it's going to curve. That's not because of you. That's because of just the strike, right? So yeah, there's room for everything, but that's kind of the ultimate rule is like how is the ball being hit.
And then what's a common mistake that you see with the driver just from the average player? You mentioned overswinging with the irons. What's a common thing you see with the driver?
I think it's kind of like what I was saying about myself. Like when I try to set up in a good position, I think people don't treat the driver. They hit set up too much to it like an iron. Like there's like you want to be athletic with it, right? Like you want to maybe be a little bit more. There's just a little bit more aggressiveness in your setup, like a little more knee bend, a little just ready to move the club a little bit faster than a 9-iron, and then like part of that is to tilt, like just move it up in your stance. Like I find people they go from like a 4-iron, and then the driver's like the next club in the bag almost, right? Like it's kind of you want to you don't want to swing differently necessarily. It's more just set up into a much more of a position that allows you to swing a driver and hit up on the ball, and kind of be athletic with it. So I think that's maybe what I see. Like I find myself telling a lot of people times, like stand a little further away from the ball, like tilt a bit more, like get your feet a bit wider, like just trying to get them in positions like that, like just allows you to hit a driver like a driver as opposed to just like an iron.
I think that's a great call out. Just if you set up to the driver like you do an iron, it's you're set up to not really present, like make the swing that is optimal for hitting a driver, like you just said. So you kind of have to be a little more aware of, okay, I need to set up properly here. I need to set up so that I can ensure success, because the swing from the backswing to impact is 1 second. So if you're not setting up the way you want to present the face at impact, it's going to be a challenge.
Yeah. Yeah, like there's only so much you can think about, and it's a lot easier to think about a setup than it is to think about something that's happening in that split second of a swing. You want to set yourself up for success, like right from the start.
I love it. And even if we look at Rory, he's the textbook setup to a driver, like you said, wide base, tilt, just looks like he's ready to launch, like just dynamic, looks like he's ready to launch that thing.
Yeah, it looks like he's ready to murder the ball, and like that's what he does. Like, and that's because he's just super athletic over the ball, right? Like he's like ready to move. Like, yeah, golf is whatever, but like the driver is like an athletic, aggressive motion, and you need to like be ready to make that happen.
Love it. All right, man. I don't want to sit on the driver too much longer. I want to make sure we have enough time to go through a bit of a mixed bag here on the 19th hole. So I'm going to just jump right into it for the sake of time. Course management's something we like to talk about on here. You and I haven't talked too much about it today, but give us one thing our listener can do to just improve their course management, just sort of a blanket tip.
I would just say you want to try to eliminate the big numbers. So the way to do that is to like just avoid the trouble. Like if there's a hole that's just bad all the way down the right, like make sure you're giving yourself buffer to the left. Like if that means hitting a hole over to the left and you can get away with it on that hole, then so be it. But like just don't hit it right. I think just kind of being aware of your own miss and then kind of what you need to do to play around that in order to just avoid the big number, because that's the killer for everyone. Good players, bad players, just don't. If you don't lose golf balls, it's a lot harder to shoot a really high score than if you're re-teeing or dropping and stuff like that.
That's a great call out, and we've heard some other players echo the same sentiment. It's better golf. Scratch golf isn't always about making more birdies or hitting sexier shots. It's about double avoidance, triple avoidance, like you just said, avoiding the big number. We're tending to favor the side of the hole where the trouble isn't, versus sometimes you see players that they'll just blast a handful of balls into the trouble and they shouldn't be there.
No, for sure. I just read something the other day, like something like a scratch golfer only averages 2 more birdies around in like a 15 or 20 handicap. So like they're not 2 strokes better, right? They're 15 strokes better, but they only make 2 more birdies. So it's the other end of the spectrum you want to tidy up, not the birdie side.
Love it. And that's something you can put into play right away. Easy. No, I love that. Moving on to your golf bag. Curious, is there a piece of equipment or a training aid or something that just never leaves your bag that's just always in there?
I mean, I was going to say alignment sticks. I don't know if those count anymore. I feel like most people have those in now. My phone's a big one. The camera, I toss myself on camera a lot, not for any sort of deep dive, just to make sure everything looks reasonable. It's a lot easier to just look at yourself every time you swing as opposed to once every quarter or something. It's just my training aid is my training aid and coach is my camera on my phone. So
okay,
I try to fire it up as much as I can just to make sure I like how things look.
Okay. I know it's nice to look at your swing when you swing it like you. Let's just put it that way. That's something that's nice to look at. I might veer away from the camera a little more than you.
Yeah, it's dangerous. It can be dangerous advice. So take that with a grain of salt. Like if you're not somebody who's looked at yourself on camera, then I would not recommend starting.
You're gonna drum up some crazy looks. Craziest thing you've seen on the golf course. Leave out names. We don't need to incriminate anyone. Is there something that comes to mind? Like, I cannot believe this happened.
I remember it was in high school, so it's not recent. High school golf, which was always just so erratic for some reason. But I was playing with a guy, like definitely had a temper. Like there was a lot of, like just mediocre shots, bad shots, just a lot of like he's not happy on a golf course, right? Like there's a lot of exclamations, club slams, the whole thing. And like like nonstop. And then we got to this one hole, like we're kind of deep into the round now, right? Like kind of mid back 9. Like he's been working, the steam has been building under the hood for 14 holes. He hits his tee shot, like just cranks it OB and like just like screams, right? Like we're talking like just everybody in the golf course heard him. Goes over to the side of the tee deck, starts ripping out push-ups. Like he's just like ripping through push-ups on the side of the tee deck. The rest of the group are just, we're kind of looking at each other like, what's going on here? Like, this point is starting to feel like unsafe, right? Like this guy's like physically like working out to like just work off the steam. And then like, he just actually seemed to help. And then a few holes later, I just went up to him, man. I'm like, like what was with the push-ups? Like, he's like, oh, well, my therapist told me like I should do, if I ever feel like that, I should just do some push-ups to help you kind of get over whatever I'm feeling at the moment. And I was like, well, pay him an extra pay. He's earning his pay because that worked.
Wow.
It was just like a guy who's just on the far end of the spectrum of kind of like working through some anger. And the funny thing, he's a great guy. Like I got to know him over the years. Like he was actually a super nice guy. It's just on the golf course, like he was just could become unhinged pretty quickly. So that kind of comes to mind. It's just kind of I've never seen it. I've just never seen it since, and I'll probably never see it again. Just some guy on the side of the tee deck ripping up push-ups. So
I love it. I've never seen that, but I think I might have to try it. You're just about to bust at the seams and you just crank out a set of 20 on the side of the blocks.
Yeah, I mean, it worked. So like, you never know. Like maybe we should all be doing it.
I had a buddy I also played high school golf with. He had a bit of he wasn't a rage monster, but he was a basketball player. He had a different pre-round routine where we'd get on the first tee and he'd go for like a 75-yard jog down the middle of the fairway, and then he'd lap himself back around just to warm himself up for the first tee. And everyone who saw him just no idea, like, what do you do? Why are you doing that? What are you doing? Like, it just got him hyped to hit the first tee ball, and he looked like he was completely unhinged. And then he'd proceed to take his practice swings. He'd orient himself towards you. Like, so instead of swinging down the fairway with his practice swing, he'd turn at a 90-degree angle and swing full throttle right at your head.
Oh God.
With some old equipment. And just at one point I just said, buddy, you gotta swing the other way. Like, that head's gonna come off. And like, oh man, I love it. Yeah, I might have to implement the push-ups if I'm ever feeling tense.
Yeah.
All right, Russ, we're almost home here. I just have a couple more questions before I let you go. What's one thing our listeners can do at home to work on their golf game, or something that you do at home to work on your game?
I think there's something to be said for just grabbing a golf club, like, as much as you can, like every day. Like, just pick one up, hold it, get your hands in the club, like feel the club. Because for me, I know if I get away from the game for a long time, like, that's what I kind of just lose feel of the grip. Like, the grip is not a natural thing, right? Like, it's kind of, so just pick it up, waggle it. If you have space to make a swing, great. Like, make a little rehearsal, like just kind of something to keep the feels, But if not, even just grabbing a club, why give it, just set it, like setting up to the ball, like, just kind of helps keep. There's something to be said for feel, right? Like, golf's such an unnatural movement and sport. Like, just if you can just grab a golf club every day and just grip it, set up and just give it a little waggle, I think it just helps kind of just, you never really completely lose feel of kind of what it feels like.
Love it. Bit of a foreign object. Just make sure doesn't feel so foreign when you get out there.
Right, exactly.
Question, and this one selfishly is for me. You're one of those players that you transition from, let's say, a low single-digit handicap past the scratch golfer and into +3. I know you've been even better at times. How are you able to bridge the gap between, let's say, a low single-digit handicap, a scratch player, and into that plus territory and pretty deep plus territory? Was there anything that allowed you to bridge that gap?
Yeah, it's tricky. Like, I mean, first of all, the difference between a +2 handicap and a 2 handicap is small, right? Like, we're talking a handful of shots around, if that. Like, a 2 handicap can easily beat a +2, like, just on a given day. Like, that can happen. I think in order to become a plus handicap, you got to shoot rounds under par, like, kind of more than not just even, not treading water. Like, you're the odd round, like, you're taking it under. And I think there's a certain amount of aggressiveness and mentality that comes to doing that. Like, to shoot a 66, like, you got to go make birdies. And, like, I think it's maybe when you're playing well is to, like, take advantage of that. Like, kind of try to learn how to, like, make a bunch of birdies, and just, if you're on, like, kind of play like you're on, right? Like, maybe play a little more aggressively, and that's how you get that, odd kind of mid-60s round in it. That's where the lower handicap comes from. It's just being able to shoot 4 or 5, 6 under par, like the odd time, not all, like, handful of times a year. That's all it takes, right? And that's what makes the handicap kind of get in the plus range. So whether it's hard to say exactly what that might be. Is that putting? Like, are you not putting? Are you putting for 2 putts? Are you actually putting for birdie? Like, are you actually trying to make stuff? Or it could even, like, it's hard to say. Maybe you're a guy who just struggles with the one big hole around, and that kind of, you can never break par. You always have that one triple you're counting or something like that. And that's a different issue. But I think a lot of times the better players is just learning how to take it up that extra gear and just, pocket that one really good round once a month or once every couple of months type thing that you otherwise don't do. And I think that's an aggressiveness mindset. Like I remember talking to a really good player once, and he said this guy who actually played some tour, like PGA Tour events, like he qualified. And he said like tour guys, like 100 yards and in, they're trying to make everything. Like they're not trying to hit it close. They're trying to make it. Like an 80-yard wedge shot, they're trying to make it. Chip shot, they're trying to make it. 50-foot putt, they're trying to make that. Like they're not lagging it. They're not, whatever, right? And like obviously for them, like we're not trying to make 80-yard shots, but like it kind of there's a mentality that comes to shooting good scores that is kind of a skill. Like, I mean, I'm working on myself. Like it's kind of, especially when you're playing well. Like it's like, all right, like, let's go have a good one. Like let's do this, right? Like if it's feeling good, you're hitting the ball good. Like take advantage of that and try to have fun with it. Try to just go low and make birdies. Like,
Yeah, I think that's something that's not talked about a lot is when Brooks gave that interview and he said when he first came out on tour, he was just trying to make the cut and then he hovered around the cut and then he was trying to be in the top 50 and then he was hovering and then top 30 and so forth. So it's almost do you go into rounds with that mindset? Like, do you go not necessarily with a number in mind, but do you go into the rounds like kind of licking your chops? Like I'm going to take advantage of, I'm going to play well today. I want to shoot under par today. Or what's your mindset as you're heading into a round of golf?
I'd say usually not. Usually for me, it's getting a couple holes in your belt, and like you can tell when you're like, all right, like I have it today, right? Like then it's hard to go to the first tee and know you're going to do what, like everybody knows. It's like having a great range session. You're like, all right, let's go, and then like things fall off the rail, right? But I also know if I'm playing a course I'm comfortable with, and the wind's down, the greens are rolling good, like I know I'm licking my chops inside, and I'm kind of hoping that I know on that kind of a day that the first few holes get off to a good start, and it's like, all right, let's ramp this up and go for it, because everything's kind of it's green light zone all the way around, right? Like you're just ready to go. I tend not to tee off like that. I'm not good enough to do that. I can't start a round off being like, all right, we're going low today. That's usually a recipe for disaster. So it's more kind of get my feet a little bit wet. It can honestly be like two shots, like two full swings that just come off just right. And you can be like, all right, I got it. Like, today's like feeling good type thing.
Then you just pin your ears back and you're kind of going.
Yeah. And even if you just make a birdie or two, like if you're a couple under through 9, but feeling good, like, go 4 under in the back 9 or something, right? Like, obviously this is more for people who are in a position to do that, but like if you are, then like it's definitely a mindset, and definitely kind of don't govern yourself, right? Like just open up the throttle and go for it.
Yeah, I love that. So it's almost what I'm hearing is be more aggressive within 100 yards. Not be more aggressive, but maybe set your expectations or set your sights a little higher within the scoring zone. Like to your point, if you're just trying to lag this 12-footer because it's for birdie, like see that putt going in. And then if you're feeling it on a certain day, don't restrict yourself. Like if you're trying to, let's say, break 70 for the first time and you're trying to shoot 69, the best way to shoot 3 under is but to shoot 4 under. You don't try to govern your, like you said, just stick handle your way in because you're liable to make mistakes. Just keep the pedal down because that's what got you playing well in the first place.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's within reason. Obviously, I'm not telling you to hit driver off the deck from 300 just because you're wheeling for it. But like it's when you have an opportunity, like just really go for go for it. And then I don't. It's a skill. It's a skill as much. It's not like there's some luck, but like there's a skill set to being comfortable doing that, and like, yeah, just kind of open the floodgates. Like it's a skill that needs to be worked on, and the more you can try to do it, then the better off over time it'll eventually start to happen. Like,
and I think the same rules apply. It doesn't matter if we're talking about under par or if you're playing bogey golf and your best round is bogey golf, and all of a sudden you're 5 under bogey golf and you're tracking for your best round ever. You can apply the same principles. Like if you're feeling good for you that day, keep it rolling. Don't you don't need to come back to what you think your level is. Like keep it going.
Yeah, I mean, how many times do you have to hear somebody talk about like, oh, I just had to bogey the last 2 holes to break 80, and like they went double double or something. Like they kind of let off the gas, right? And like they started doing something different than what they were doing the first 16 holes. Like, yeah, it's exactly the same thing. Just different, aiming for a different target, but same idea.
Yeah, it's almost like not being content. It's almost like I've spoken with my dad in the past, and I've been fortunate to watch him shoot some really good scores. We were recently playing an executive course, and he shot 8 under on the back nine. He made 8 straight birdies, and it's yeah, it was and it's almost we talk about it after, and he just kind of said, I get one and I want another one. And when I get that next one, I want the next one. There's never this feeling of, oh, I'm now at this point that I'm content with and I'm at my lowest spot. It's just like, no, I want one more. You get to 4, I want 5. Yeah. To your point, the foot's never off the gas there.
Yeah. Like for me, I struggle with the idea of like, oh, I've made my share or something like that, right? Like yeah, like I'm due for a bogey. I'm due for I've made as many birdies as I should. I made a long putt here, so if I miss a short one, it all balances out. Like no, like it's like why can't every hole be another birdie, or why can't like there's no reason for it, right? So it's like it's so easy to limit yourself mentally. Like you just kind of justify things, or yeah, you become satisfied with where you're at in a round, right? It's like, all right, let's just get to the clubhouse. So I'm good with this. So yeah, exactly. I mean, your dad maybe better have him on a pod then.
It's interesting because I also struggle with that, where you wonder how much juice do I have today? Like if you've just bagged 3 or 4 20-footers in a round, you're batting way above your percentage, but it's almost like within a round of golf, that's such a small sample size. Why, out of the thousands and thousands of holes of golf you'll play, why couldn't this be a day where everything falls? There's over the course of a career, it's all going to net out. But for today or tomorrow, why not let it fall? Like we were talking about it earlier. You were 63, 64 in your stroke play championship. For that to happen, to be 8 under, 7 under, 15 under par for 2 days, over a career, you're not going to average that. But in 2 days, I mean, you were flying.
Yeah, like it's kind of, you catch lightning in a bottle sometimes, and like even the whole like that's the mentality. Like just even thinking about the percentage of it, just don't think about it. Like that doesn't matter. Like you're saying, it's not. Yeah, like on a 2-hole basis, yeah, your statistics are way off track, but no, it doesn't matter. It's like when you flip a coin, it's 50% chance every time it's going to be heads or tails. It doesn't matter how many times it's landed. If it's landed heads 10 times in a row, the next flip it's still a 50% chance. But humans, we just struggle with stuff like that, right? We try to have rules and thoughts and logic, which is true, but like it's also that can limit yourself in situations like when you're on a heater, like just let it go, right? Like don't think about it.
I love it. One last question I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you. You've played in a lot of big tournaments. You've competed for a lot of big tournaments, won some, came up short in others. When you're in the heat of the moment, you're under pressure, it matters to you. How do you handle those pressure situations?
Yeah, it's tricky. I don't know if I had figured it out by any means. I try to treat essentially the area around my golf ball is like a bubble that is my bubble. And like once you're in your bubble, like it's the same golf ball it's always been. Like just just do what you've been doing. Like it's just kind of that's your zone, right? Like that's your zone for now. You're just worry about the shot, and like I get nervous when people are watching. So I'm thinking about like, am I walking weird, or like you just start thinking about weird stuff, right? But in your bubble, that's your bubble, right? Like that's kind of you're over the same golf ball you're standing over on a range that random weeknight when you're by yourself. Like nothing has changed. So I try to set up a barrier that is like, for lack of a better word, like a safe zone that you just go in, and like that when you're up over like looking at the shot over the ball, like that. That's kind of all that matters, right? Like it doesn't really, there's nothing else to worry about. So, but that what that does is allow you, like between shots, you can get nervous again and still think whatever your brain's gonna think. But like once you enter your bubble, like it's now just that golf shot, right? It's kind of just focus on what you're doing and what you need to do, and just kind of be in your own little private area, even though it's not. It's just kind of mentally construct that.
Do you lean on a consistent routine as well to provide a bit of additional security, or is it more just in your mind you're framing as like, this is my space, I'm kind of just here, and I'm going to just do what I do?
Yeah, the routine definitely is part of it, like that kind of familiarity that's comfortable, especially when you get stressed, nervous or stressed out. But it's more like I try to treat it like this is my space, my zone. It's the same piece of ground you've hit every golf shot you've ever hit off of. Like, it's just the golf ball's just sitting there like it always had. Like, just try to just create like a little kind of safe zone where you can kind of just worry about that, right? And that's kind of what I try to do. It doesn't always happen, but like it's kind of just I just try to set the area around my golf ball is like my safe area. Like when you get into the shot, like that's all you're doing. That's all you're thinking about.
It's interesting you say that. It sounds very much like when I listened to Tiger and talk about him and his son at the PNC championship, and he just explained to Charlie, like, this is our little area. Like we're gonna make this like much smaller. Like when we're operating, it's just him and I. Like doesn't matter what's going on outside of the ropes or around the ropes. So that is interesting. That just and even in my limited success that I've had in tournaments, I've tried to make in the bigger moments things smaller. Like if there's a crowd watching, I don't look at the crowd. I just bring myself back into what's the shot ahead of me? How do I make this smaller and just me and the shot that I'm playing? So I think that's great advice.
Yeah, I think we all probably do it to a certain extent. Like you just have to kind of simplify where your brain's at. It's just another golf shot, right? And try to treat it like that.
I love it, man. Well, Russ, I don't want to take up any more of your time. I greatly appreciate you spending this time with us. And I know I've learned a ton. I'm excited to really hit those wedges first and foremost. I really want to get out there and hit some 60, 70-yard wedges. But yeah, like, thanks again, man. It's great to see you, and wishing you all the best of luck this year with tournaments, and thanks for letting us go behind the brim and learn from you.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me, and having me as a guest, and thinking highly of me enough to have me as a guest. I think as golfers, we all love talking golf, so it's been a treat to do this on a little more formal venue. Good luck with the podcast. It's been fun. So I'm looking forward to hearing what some of your other listeners or people on the pod say as well.
Appreciate it, man. And for our listeners too, follow along. Russ competes in all the provincial stuff, the national stuff here in Ontario and Canada. So if you want to track his progress, you can look him up online. I know I'll be supporting him and hopefully playing alongside him, but if not, supporting him from the sidelines. Thanks for joining us on today's episode of Behind the Brim. We'll be releasing podcasts every Monday. And if you want more golf content, follow us on social at behindthebrim_golf on both Instagram and TikTok. Hope you have a great week.